Hi, I'm Stephanie Michelle. Donald Trump is the literal Antichrist personage of the Bible, arrived in his own Trump brand name as Jesus seemingly predicted. The Gospel of John 5:43. And he is currently revealing himself more and more to be the lawless one. 2 Thessalonians 2:4-10. He is a wannabe fascist dictator who is currently transforming our federal law enforcement agents into his secret police, where we currently have people running around arresting people wearing masks and refusing to identify themselves. We honestly don't know if these are right-wing militia groups simply impersonating U.S. officers, simply pretending to be ICE agents, yet being empowered by our lawless U.S. president. Yes, ICE agents can go undercover, but it is illegal for them not to identify themselves during an arrest when they are asked for their name. They are currently ignoring habeas corpus and refusing the due process of law, where in the United States of America, citizens and non-citizens by our U.S. Constitution are presumed innocent until proven guilty. In fact, they are even refusing members of Congress entry into ICE detention facilities. And Congress is a co-equal branch of government, the legislative branch. They are also ignoring judicial orders, and that is also a co-equal branch, the judicial branch. And this Friday, June 6, Donald Trump illegally deployed California National Guardsmen against the consent of the California Governor, Gavin Newsom, as well as the Los Angeles Mayor, Karen Bass. And these ICE agents were not simply arresting illegal immigrant criminals, but rather they were arresting elementary school children during their graduation ceremonies. And also immigrants legally appearing at court. And now Donald Trump is even threatening to send in 500 U.S. Marines to California. And currently this would be in violation of the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, updated in 1956, 1981, and 2021, to include other branches of the U.S. military besides just the U.S. Army, including the U.S. Marines, the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Space Force. But the Posse Comitatus Act limits the federal government's usage of the U.S. military nationally, which brings us to the topic of U.S. martial law and the constitutional provision of habeas corpus, Article 1, Section 9 of our beloved U.S. Constitution, which states that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended, unless when, in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. In our entire U.S. history, habeas corpus has only been suspended once, by President Abraham Lincoln in 1863 during the U.S. Civil War. Martial law was invoked at a limited capacity without revoking habeas corpus a few times in our U.S. history. By President George Washington during the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794, by General Andrew Jackson in New Orleans during the War of 1812, during the Mormon War in Missouri in 1843, by the Missouri Governor Lilburn Boggs against Joseph Smith Jr. and the Mormons, during the Utah War of 1857 in the Utah Territory, by President James Buchanan against the Utah Governor Brigham Young and the Mormons, and in the Hawaii Territory during World War II, from 1941 to 1944, by the Hawaii Governor Joseph Poindexter. But on April 28th of 2025, President Donald Trump signed an executive order mandating that the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, determine a route to use the military in law enforcement capacities. And that is what we are currently seeing. Now, I am not a progressive liberal. In fact, before I converted to Judaism in 2003, I was a fundamentalist Christian, a dispensationalist, and deeply influenced by prophecy writers such as Grant R. Jeffrey. Indeed, collecting most of his writings. Armageddon, Appointment with Destiny, Apocalypse, The Coming Judgment of the Nations, Messiah, War in the Middle East, Prince of Darkness, and Final Warning. Indeed, in books such as these, he was warning evangelical Christians about the dangers of liberal Democrats such as President Bill Clinton, allegedly invoking the Insurrection Act of 1807 to persecute Christians. But today, it is actually Donald Trump and Christian nationalists who are trying to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807. Title 10 of the U.S. Code of Law, Section 254, which provides an exemption to the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 and empowers the U.S. President to deploy the U.S. military nationally, where normally the National Guard are under the direct control of the governors. Indeed, where are the states' rights in all of this? The MAGA cult of Republicans are a bunch of hypocrites. The Insurrection Act of 1807 has been used throughout U.S. history a few times by President Thomas Jefferson in 1808 during the U.S. Embargo Act of 1807, by President Andrew Jackson in 1831 to suppress a slave revolt in Virginia, by President Abraham Lincoln in 1861 to try and stop the secession of the states at the beginning of the U.S. Civil War, by President Ulysses S. Grant in 1874 to try and suppress a white supremacist insurgency in Louisiana, by President Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965, 1967, and 1968 to try and stop the suppression of civil rights in the South, as well as to try and suppress civil unrest in the wake of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and most recently by President George H.W. Bush in 1992 to try and suppress civil unrest in the wake of the murder of Rodney King, which of course provoked the fears of people like Grant R. Jeffrey. Of course, it's probably not insignificant that the moon entered Scorpio on Friday night into Saturday morning. During Shabbat, the Sabbath, Shekinah. Thank you for coming and watching me this evening. In the Aramaic language of the Sefer Zohar, the Book of Radiance, in the Aramaic language of the Sefer Zohar, the Book of Radiance, Ta Kazeh, come, see. Shalom, peace.